Good evening and welcome to the January 24th meeting of the Auburn Board of Selectmen. This meeting is being recorded. There's no one else in the audience also recording, since there is no audience. All members are present. Can we stand and salute the flag?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all.
All right. Can everyone hear me all right, so we don't have the problems that we did last time? I see Lionel nodding. Sarah, can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. So under public comments, we have nothing, public hearings and presentations. We have the continued public hearing on ARPA, funds to solicit input from residents and the business community. So can I have a motion to reopen the hearing?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded by roll call vote. Mrs. Ruffley?
Yes.
Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren? Scott, you're muted. No, I was thinking SC was him, but you're right. That's not him. Or that he was called. There he is. There's Brooke. Scott, did you hear that last vote?
I didn't hear that, no.
It was a motion to open or reopen the, or to continue the public hearing for ARPA. Just
Aye.
Thanks. And the chair votes yes. So members will remember that we had a meeting last month. Three of us were there to solicit public input on how the town should spend the ARPA funds, the $5 million that we're receiving from ARPA. We had a couple of people attend the meeting and make suggestions there. And in your packets, you have the response to questions from town administration, to board members' questions, and to the public's questions. We also received one response from someone via email with suggestions that I'll turn it over to the town manager to talk in detail about the actual suggestions.
Great. Through the chair, thank you. Can all the members hear me?
I'm seeing nods.
Okay, great. Very good. Thank you. Good evening. Yes, in your packet, you have a copy of the memo that we put together based on the request of the Board of Selectmen for a summary of the comments that, I'm going to have to talk this way, sorry, of the summary of the comments that we received throughout the public process. And again, as the chair just mentioned, so we had set up a website, which is still there. We updated it Friday with all of the information on Treasury's final rule, as well as a summary of the final rule. It's good reading. It's about 437 pages for the final rule and about 45 pages for the summary of the final rule. And as late as last Thursday, there was another amendment to it. So we understand that there'll still be some amendments forthcoming from U.S. Treasury. So that being said, we put into this memo the comments that were received through the public hearing that you held on November 29th, in addition to another comment that was received after the close of the public comment period on the website, which technically we didn't really close it. There's an email address people could send their comments in. We monitor it every day, and we've received one comment on that. So that is also included in your packet. And then where appropriate, we put our response as to whether the question that was raised by those attending the public hearing or writing in whether the ARPA funds were eligible and whether it was a consideration. So all those questions and answers are in here. Again, as on the November 29th hearing, we only had the interim final rule from the U.S. Treasury. And again, the U.S. Treasury is the one that establishes all the parameters for the utilization of ARPA funds. So the final rule was issued just in early January. And again, that's a 437-page final rule. And it does change some of the parameters that were in the interim rule. So we're still in the process of revising it. And I mentioned in the memo that as late as even last Thursday, I had attended, Ed and I both attended a webinar put on by U.S. Treasury. It was great. It was a lot of great information. And at the end of the webinar, they stated that they would be coming out with further guidance over the next several weeks. So we anticipate that there'll be additional information forthcoming. There may be additional changes forthcoming to the use of some of the funds. There are certain categories that they're still working on based on some of the questions that they've received from the public. So I wanted to mention two things that are not in this packet because we didn't have them when I submitted this to you on Friday. So the first thing is we did receive a letter this morning from Mass Cops, which is the union that represents 3 of our collective bargaining units in the police department, the dispatch unit, the patrol unit, and the superiors unit. And it is a letter requesting consideration of premium pay under ARPA. The second discussion that we had today, because we didn't find our information out until this afternoon, but we brought it to your attention in the January 9th meeting where Deputy Chief Glenn Johnson had come in and talked about a lot of the stresses that are on the department for servicing ambulance services and calls. And we had mentioned at that meeting that we were going to look at ARPA funds to see if anything could be done regarding a third ambulance to maybe put some additional shifts on. So we asked the chief and the deputy chief to do some work on that. And this came in to us tonight. And I have copies of it, which I will get to all of you tomorrow. So certainly not asking you for any vote on this, just wanted to raise it within the context of we're still in the public process, we're still in the hearing. So as you know from Deputy Chief Johnson, the fire department has been extremely busy. They need some relief, staffing relief. Oftentimes, both of their ambulances are out. They run 2 ambulances. We have the 4. We have the backup, and then we have the other backup. But oftentimes, both ambulances are out at the same time, and we don't have staffing to staff a third ambulance. So just like we provide mutual aid to other communities, we rely on it. We also rely on the mutual aid that other communities provide to us. So we are seeking board approval, and again, it doesn't have to be tonight, but I wanted to mention it tonight, to put on that third ambulance on a temporary basis. So the recommendation of the chief and the deputy chief, based on a very thorough data analysis of the times of day where their call volume is highest and what types of calls they're getting and what the status of those calls are, and the fact that a lot of them are generated from COVID, or we don't know that they're generated from COVID until you go on the call. So there's always a COVID concern. So our town accountant, Tom Zadelis, found out some more information today and felt that this would be an allowable cost. So based on that, the chief is recommending putting on temporarily a third ambulance on the heaviest times where those calls are coming in, which would be Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. The call volume actually starts a little earlier than 9 and it goes later than 6. But that being said, it's difficult enough to get that many employees to be able to cover the shifts. So they felt that it would be an enormous relief to get another ambulance on from 9 to 6. The weekly cost estimated of that is about $5,300. If we were to do it for an entire year, it would be about $277,000. So it is certainly up for discussion as to how long we would have to do this, but we would easily say at least for the next 6 months, possibly to another year. As you heard from the deputy chief, what we're finding is that while many of the calls may not at the end turn out to be specific COVID cases, one of the issues is with COVID and so many employees working from home and so many families now having children at home that normally might be in school, but they're home because of being close contacts and some of the other outbreaks, that the ambulance calls have been ticking up incredibly, even if they're not related to COVID. At the end, it is related to COVID because society has changed. People are home more. They're not out of town during the day at work. They're in their homes. So the call volumes are automatically going to go up. So we could certainly have a discussion, but it would be our recommendation that we allocate funding from ARPA to fund this third ambulance. So I will stop at that. And one more thing, one more thing in this letter would be, we talked about getting that staffing study done. So we've been quoted $25,000 to get a staffing study done to determine what our staffing needs are in the interim and in the long term. So we can start working toward that. Excuse me. That funding is also eligible under ARPA. So our recommendation would be twofold. It would be to fund $25,000 for the staffing study, which I believe we should do as soon as possible, so we can start to look at budgets and come up with our long-term plan. And the other recommendation would be possibly to fund up to $278,000 on ARPA to put on the third ambulance, recognizing we'll have to watch the data and we may not have to go a full year with that, but this will get us at least through the period of the study. The study may come back and say you need to continue the ambulance, in which case, while it's ARPA eligible, it would be nice to continue it through ARPA, but we also want to start looking at increasing the staffing. So per the vote of the Board of Selectmen on January 11th, we are applying for the SAFER grant that was mentioned at that meeting, and you voted to allow us to go forward on that. So we're going to be applying for 8 new positions under the SAFER grant. That grant is due February 4th. So with that being said, those are all the requests that have come in under this. Obviously, the requests that we had prior to tonight, we've already mentioned to the board. And we're looking through DPW for sewer improvements, stormwater improvements. Again, those types of improvements will save the taxpayer dollars because we would take it off of the CIP list. So we wouldn't have to borrow for it. HVAC improvements, again, that's going to be something that is going to have to go on the capital improvement list over the next couple of years. And again, if we can take it off that list and fund it with ARPA, we save the taxpayer dollars, as well as ongoing public safety needs and public health needs, which will be yet to be determined. So, and if premium pay is a consideration, that is something else as well. So that's pretty much what we've received in-house. We did reach out to the water department, as I mentioned in the memo, and the water department at this time, the Auburn Water District, Mr. Woods, Greg Woods, who's the superintendent, said at this time he couldn't think of anything specifically that the town could fund that would be an assist to them with improving the water quality. Because if the water quality were to be improved, it would likely involve the installation and construction of a water treatment facility. And that would be likely upwards of $20 million. So the town's $5 million in total that we received wouldn't even be enough to cover that type of a treatment facility. He said as far as low-hanging fruit, anything we need right away, he wanted to let the board know he was very appreciative that you asked if they needed anything, but there was nothing within that price range of the $5 million that we could do right now to help them.
Thank you. Do board members have any questions or comments right now regarding what came in at the public hearing? I know not all members were able to make it because we had it on a night that we don't usually schedule meetings. Or
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Rutherford?
I want to speak to the last part of what the town manager just went over with the fire department. So I'm anxious to see the letter and to go over, getting that third ambulance. It's my understanding that ambulances are one of the things that actually generate revenue in town too. So, I don't think it's just a matter of us spending money. It's a matter that we'll be also bringing in more revenue or some offset to that. So I'm definitely interested. Obviously, I don't know enough about it because it just came up with the town manager 5 minutes ago. But I think that it's certainly something that I'm interested to see whether they're talking about putting more. I know with the SAFER grant, that would allow us to hire more firefighters, but before that, with maybe some of this funding, would it allow us to, pay for callbacks for firefighters that might be off duty that can come and in those times man the third ambulance, or how that's going to all work. So I'm interested to see that. I do want to say, though, that I hope that that's not in place of us considering, some sort of payout or monies to the firefighters and paramedics and police officers and first responders that for the last 2 years have put themselves out there, put themselves at risk, put their families at some risk, and I want this to happen with the ambulance, but I also want to see the firefighters, police officers, first responders get rewarded a little bit for the sacrifice that they made and for the time that they put in, and it's somewhat thankless, so they need to be thanked, however we can. So I just want to make sure that we don't take the ambulance portion of it, if we go ahead with that, to add the ambulance, which we need and which is the right thing to do as a town, but I don't want that to come in place of helping out and rewarding and thanking the first responders that have really done a tremendous job over the last, always done a tremendous job, but especially over the last 2 years. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, you just... There we go.
Here we go.
Thank you. I actually do have a question based on that. So is this $277,000, and I don't know if I should direct this question to Ed or Tom. Does that $277,000 include the estimated revenue being brought in from the ambulance, or so would we be looking at less than $277,000 based on
The two, and I can, and Tom and Ed, please jump in, but the 277 is the actual cost to ARPA. So when you're talking about ARPA funds, you don't talk necessarily about the revenues that come in, even though we know revenues would come in. With ARPA, we have to justify the costs, regardless of whether it's, so that is the cost of 2 employees to run those extra ambulances. And technically it's overtime costs because they've already done their regular shifts. So to bring in a third ambulance without adding any additional personnel, you have to pay overtime to existing personnel. So to Lionel's point, yes, it would not be a substitute for a long-term plan for adding personnel to the fire department. It's more of a short-term temporary plan to at least get another ambulance out there to alleviate some of the call volume pressures that they're facing now, with the long-term plan being to add staffing. But we want to get that staffing study underway so we know what that long-term plan is. So this is strictly the cost for ARPA. Is that right, Tom, Ed?
Really, that's correct.
Okay.
So those are the hard costs associated with that impact shift.
Great. Okay, so it actually would end up costing the town. I mean, it would cost ARPA the $277,000, but the town even less than that in the long term because it would bring in revenue. So that's really good to know and to add on to this. Thank you, Mr. Berthium, for catching that and bringing that up. Do other members have any comments, questions regarding anything else that was brought up either at a past meeting or this one with regards to ARPA? All right, seeing none, I actually have a couple. So I was mainly wondering about bringing in anything that could be done about the water district and improving water quality, because in discussions with residents, it seems like the two major things that I've heard, at least with regard to ARPA, is there any way to lower taxes, which, as the town manager mentioned, would best be done by going after either the HVAC or sewer and stormwater treatments, anything in our CIP. And on top of that, I've heard people mention water quality, and that was mentioned in the email as well. So, my question was just going to be, how much was a facility that we were looking at? And I know the town manager mentioned it, but over $20 million to improve the water quality. But is there anything else? I think you'd mentioned that stormwater could be.
Correct. That's a good point. So when I spoke to Greg Woods, the superintendent of the Auburn Water District, he felt that investing ARPA dollars into stormwater improvements, which we had recommended early on in the fall, would be one of the best ways to be a help to the water quality, because you need stormwater programs and stormwater maintenance in order to prevent some of the issues that you have with water quality. So his recommendation was, rather than giving money to the water district to take on another project or another study that they're not taking on at this time, that investing into stormwater improvements does improve your water quality. And he's absolutely right. Under ARPA, any sewer, and this is, again, it's in the final rules, so we're still reading through it, and Tom's probably reading it right now as he's participating on the call, but according to ARPA, any sewer and stormwater improvements have to tie back to water quality, DEP, and the Clean Water Act. So stormwater improvements do that. So it clearly is recognized by the federal government that stormwater improvements benefit water quality. So I should have mentioned that before. Thank you.
No, thanks for, yeah. This is just something that I know I'm going to get questions about from residents who are concerned about water quality. The other thing that I was wondering, so when you spoke to Mr. Woods, if this is a project that could cost $20 million and wasn't something that they were looking at building now, because a water treatment facility would cost the $20 million, did they express any interest in it if the town would subsidize any part of that with ARPA at all?
No.
Okay.
No, not at this time. I did not get the impression it was something that they're looking at immediately.
Okay.
I think it was something that he said the only way to truly improve overall your water quality would be a water treatment facility. And given the cost of that, I don't believe that they're looking at that right now. So again, his recommendation was to focus on stormwater improvements on the town side, because that would benefit the water quality.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't sure if, the town could send in the $4 million if we, oh, yep.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. My question to that would be, if we're looking at, maybe not a $20 million project, I would imagine that there would have to be a, $20,000 or $30,000 study in design. Is that something that we could have in place so that, our town water system isn't really going to change that much over the next, probably 20 years. So would we be smart to get a study and design done so that at least that portion of it would be covered, and the water district would have the layout of what they need to do. So if it had to go out to bid at some point, they would have that.
Through the chair, I did ask Greg that question when I first reached out to him, if we could help with any type of assessment of water quality and any type of study with recommendations for the future. And he said at this point, not right now. So I can certainly reach out to him again and tell him we had this discussion, but I spoke to him 2 weeks ago and I asked him to get back to me if he wanted to think about it, and thought that maybe there was an opportunity to use those monies towards some type of a study or a plan. And at the time, 2 weeks ago, he said that was not something that they were looking to do.
Thank you. Yeah, I would be open to reaching out again. It probably won't change, but it couldn't hurt just in
Sure,
case.
no, I'm happy to.
Thank you. With that, are there any members of the public on the call? I don't think so. It doesn't look like it. There might be caller 3 or 2 who I don't know that want to speak on anything related to ARPA.
Mr. Chair,
Chairman.
Mr. Carpenter.
I just have one based on some of the discussion, and I know this has been brought up in other ways. A plan for pipe replacements. I know we have some of the, our infrastructure is, begun in the 50s or perhaps even before that for sewer and water. Is there any appetite for that type of project? I have absolutely no idea how much it would cost or if it's even feasible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, we've had that conversation with DPW, and it is extremely expensive for pipe replacement. That is something that I believe there was one specific area that the DPW was recommending that we might want to take a look at. It would far exceed, if we were to do pipe replacement, it would far exceed any ARPA monies that we have or will probably get in the future. It's very, very expensive, but it's something that we looked at and asked DPW to give us, is there one that we could afford to do within the ARPA dollars that would make a difference? Because it is an aging infrastructure, as you said, Mr. Carpenter, and we're going to continue to have problems. So the DPW recommendations under sewer and water, we just would have to make sure that the recommendations that they have are eligible under ARPA. And again, it has to all tie back into the Clean Water Act. So it's certainly a consideration that we've given a lot of thought to and will continue to. And again, that would save the taxpayer dollars money because if something, we're looking at pipes and which ones are potentially going to need repair or burst or need replacement. And if you have to replace them, then that comes from the taxpayers and the ratepayers. Tom or Ed, just quickly, have you seen in the final rule that pipe replacement is considered? I know when we first looked at it, it appeared to be, as long as it was tied to the Clean Water Act. I don't know that the final rule, or if we've even got through the whole thing right now where we can even say that. But Tom, have you seen anything about that?
No, I have not. And if it's like you stated before, if it goes back and fits into the Clean Water Act, it would be a possibility. So that would be the second part that I'd have to go research. How extensive would replacement be mentioned in the Clean Water Act? So we can get back to you with a report on that.
Great. Thank you.
I was just wondering if we could potentially, I know you mentioned in the letter several other funding sources. I don't know if any of that, if we can pair some of this money with that, how you would even go about an assessment of, cost and the best place to start. So.
Yes, through the chair, that's one of the things that we've been looking at. As we mentioned when the first night of the hearing, the federal government has the Infrastructure Act that did pass. The Build Back Better Act has not passed yet. That was additional infrastructure dollars. The federal infrastructure dollars, we don't have the exact parameters of that program yet and how it's going to work and what money gets allocated to the state and how do we apply for those dollars. But in the interim, the state did pass their ARPA / FY22 surplus budget bill. And I think I mentioned that in the memo as well. So there are dollars that will be available there. We are still going through that entire process and looking at the line items. And we're waiting to see how the town would be eligible to apply for some of those dollars. A lot of them are funding certain programs, and so therefore you apply to the program to get the dollars. But it does appear that there will be money for infrastructure in the future between the state's recently passed law and the federal government. There should be additional dollars for infrastructure. We just have to make sure and find out if the town itself is going to qualify for any of that. And to your point, Mr. Carpenter, it could absolutely be used to augment ARPA funding if we're eligible, if our projects are eligible.
All right. Do any other board members have anything else to add?
Selectmen?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, we approved $60,000 for Auburn Youth and Family Services to help out with families and children and seniors Do we get an update on that at all to know where we stand? I know we've just had a pretty good cold spell. I don't know if any of that fund goes to, maybe put a little bit of fuel. I know we also have the Auburn Fuel Fund. There's a golf tournament that funds that, but do we get some sort of a report from our seniors, from our AYFS that kind of gives a status of things, being that it's been a little bit of a rough January?
Through the chair, we did, after the board approved of the initial 60,000, and I just want to be clear, that is another category that when we do come in with our final recommendations to you, that is absolutely a category that is eligible. We don't have a question that it would be eligible, especially for the food insecurity portion of it. So that's something we might want to consider doing over a multi-year period. But right now, after the board made that vote, Tom Zadelis has been working with Sally D'Arcangelo on a scope of services, and it just came in, I believe, on Friday was the final scope that they had talked about for the funds. So we wrote up a contract, and Tom, I believe, is that contract back with Sally now, waiting for a signature?
Through this year, I haven't sent it over to her, but I can do that in the morning.
Okay.
Madam Manager.
Yep, so we just finished that on Friday. But Tom has had several meetings with Sally trying to identify. So yes, to you, Mr. Bertham, we have to have line items, and we had to develop a new reporting system. So that's the first ARPA dollars that we've actually spent. So Tom has been working with AYFS and Eddie to make sure that we have a reporting form that we'll have to submit. And moving forward, Tom, those reports are going to have to be submitted to ARPA quarterly beginning April 1?
Yeah, that is correct, Madam Manager, every quarter starting in April.
Okay. So yes, Lionel, we will have to provide quarterly reports to the federal government, so we will see exactly how those dollars are spent. AYFS will have to report to us when they put in for their reimbursement requests on where those dollars went. So we do have the scope of services. I don't recall seeing fuel in there. For the most part, I saw food services, things for food security, things for the food pantry, and counseling services, because the demand on their counseling services has been huge. And those were the areas that they initially requested funding in. I don't know that fuel assistance, I would assume it probably would be eligible, but that wasn't a category that I believe she initially asked for. But the other categories will hopefully free up some funding by funding some of the food security and funding some of the counseling programs. Hopefully they will be able to direct some of their other dollars toward the areas that are not being funded through ARPA. We still are, Ed, correct me or jump in here, our annual allocation is, what is it for this current year to AYFS? Is it 130?
Julie, I believe it's about 133. So we've been trying to index it by 2.5 every year at a minimum. So I think we're at about 133.
Okay. So this $60,000 was just for the remainder of this fiscal year. So when the town administration comes back with their recommendations to the board, based on all the input we've received from the public and from the board, we could put in that recommendation additional funding if indeed, Lionel, they needed money for fuel, or they found that was going to be a problem for next year. It's certainly something that they could request for us under ARPA, and then we can find out through Tom if it, we're just waving at everyone. So yeah, we can certainly look at that, Lionel, as far as the fuel. And we will definitely be getting reports.
If I can follow up with that, if somebody were having an issue where, a senior, especially a senior, but somebody that can't afford, should they call the police station? Should they call Auburn Youth and Family Services? Should they call the fire station? Do we have an emergency hotline? This is more just because we're in a meeting and there might be people watching. What is the best first step for people that, let's say, are in panic mode?
Lionel, in my estimation, the last board meeting, there wasn't any talk about, we went through line item budget, items. I didn't see anything for oil, but there's always, in the wintertime, always oil help that's being done through Auburn Youth or through the Greater Worcester Community Action, something like that. But yeah, Auburn Youth would be the place to start. For sure.
So whether it be food, fuel, anything like that, start with Auburn Youth. And Scott, does Auburn Youth have a 24-hour hotline, or is it during business hours?
Generally during business hours.
Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Carpenter, I saw that you unmuted.
Yeah, just one more. As we're talking about individuals who have kind of been shuttered in with the senior center being closed for most of the year, has there been any outreach done there to see what we can do for seniors? I mean, now we're going through another extended period of, the senior center not being available for programs and the like. It's great that, the Meal on Wheels is still in place, but, there's so many more needs the seniors have that the senior center serves. Has there been any thought to that?
Through the chair, yes, there is. Our outreach worker is still working with our seniors every day. She's there. Her hours haven't changed. The seniors can't come into the building, but she still does all her outreach. She does a lot of work linking seniors with Worcester Community Action Council for Fuel, with AYFS, with food programs. We had actually allocated some of our CARES funding to additional Meals on Wheels when we needed it. We told them if they need additional funding from us for any of the Meals on Wheels programs to let us know. So we do hear from the seniors. She's very busy with that particular outreach, so we haven't stopped that. The building may be closed for programs and events, but the outreach continues.
Yeah, I'm just more worried about the isolation aspect of, in that they are also, in a very high-risk category, many of them. What more we can do. I think it's great we're doing counseling for the students and others, but I really think that, we should spend some thought or time to those people who have been kind of stuck at home, not able to engage in a lot of activities, what we can kind of do. I know the library's done some programming for the kids. I don't know if there's some adult version that, we could potentially do or develop for them.
No, that's certainly, if it's a disproportionate population, then it is ARPA eligible. And there's a lot of definition applied to disproportionate population. So those that are served by AYFS technically fall into the disproportionate population. So if it's through AYFS, we have that ability. It's a little bit more difficult to justify ARPA dollars for the broad population as being disproportionate. So we have to just be careful. That's why running funding through AYFS is a good thing, or putting it specifically toward programs that benefit the disproportionate population. But that has to be qualified in all of the reporting to ARPA. So certainly where programs can be done for a specific population, but generally speaking, Tom, jump in here, generally speaking, programs for the public, whether they're like library programs or, we were talking about outdoor programs, recreational programs, parks, that's a little bit more difficult to qualify under ARPA.
That is correct, and you have to, as you inferred to earlier, you have to targeted to disparate populations primarily. So that the information gathering on who you're catering to is extremely important, in doing it at the front end of the project or the engagement is important, because it all has to get fed back to the service with the quarterly reporting.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Brother.
Through you to the town manager, you mentioned that the senior coordinator is still reaching out, even though the senior center is closed. Is that in the form of, like, was it last year that some of the teachers were doing like a phone tree and just kind of calling on our seniors and, even for mental wellness, just to say hi and make sure they're doing okay. Obviously Auburn Youth does a great job. Our school system does a great job of looking out for students. But is there some sort of a phone tree? I thought there was one set up last year. Do we still have that in process?
We do not. We did that last year when COVID first broke. It was actually the year before. It was March of 20, which is now going on 2 years. March of 20, we set it up. And we had 120 teachers and municipal employees reaching out to 5,000 seniors. And we did that for about 4 months. We made weekly calls. We were constantly reaching out to them. That program pretty much stopped as the majority of seniors that we reached, we gave them all the information that they needed. That information is still valid today. We said, if you need us, call us. If you have any additional needs, call the outreach coordinator at the senior center. So our calls to them are not continuing because we don't have the staffing to call 4,000 people, especially when everyone's back working full-time jobs now. When we had some employees working remotely, it was a great job for them. But we did make sure all the seniors know where to call. It actually got to the point on around the third month of the program where a lot of the seniors asked us not to call anymore. They said it was great, but they didn't need the call. They knew we were there. They knew where to go for the information, and they were appreciative, but I think they didn't really want the weekly calls anymore. So the senior center does still have a list of some of those that liked to be contacted frequently, and there are also, I'm trying to not divulge too much information, but there are also lists of residents that the outreach coordinator has that she knows need help. And those are the ones that she focuses on.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, we are still doing the Are You OK program right through the police department?
Through the chair, I believe that still is in existence. Those calls go out on an automated basis, I believe on a daily basis.
Right, I knew that. It's something they have to sign up for. I know that, but yeah, I just think it's, obviously we have to follow the guidelines that the federal government sets out, but I think with a lot of seniors not being able to get around and being many of them widows, not having access to, socialization can easily turn into a health crisis for a lot of citizens. So whatever we can do, I would appreciate a hard look at that for the seniors.
Yep, absolutely. And we're hoping, again, in 3 weeks that we're open again with our programs and events, because that is the best, is to have in-person programs and events that our seniors can participate in. It was too dangerous to do that for the last couple of weeks and for the next couple of weeks, given the numbers that we just got yesterday. So we have put into place the extension of the closing of municipal offices until February 21st. In which case, about a week before, it will review the numbers and hopefully we can get back into in-person programs and events. The senior center is still planning events, so as soon as we're open, they're ready to move forward again, and a lot of the regular weekly program can start up again.
Any other questions, comments, board members or members of the public? So seeing on, I do want to ask, since a lot of things were brought up tonight, that we continue this hearing. I'm open to even trying another public hearing next Monday if members want to schedule one, and trying to solicit more public input, or we can just choose to leave the hearing open until our next meeting, which I think is February 14th. Since a lot is changing with ARPA, I don't know what board members' thoughts are on continuing the hearing or closing it tonight, but that would be my preference.
Mr. Chairman, I would just say that it seems like this is a moving target, to steal a phrase from Mr. Kazanovich. I would say I would be in favor of continuing the hearing until our first meeting in March, which I believe is the 14th. That way, town staff will have a time to review what's just been released, and who knows how many supplements potentially might need to be drafted at the federal or state level to help guide the process. And then just encourage people to continue to use the dedicated avenues that the manager has identified to weigh in. And, I think it's great that we have that web page so that people can read about that, what is eligible, what isn't eligible. Obviously, it sounds like it's, again, a moving target. So we all have to be patient and try and make the best decisions we can.
Mr. Chair, if that's a motion to continue it till the first meeting in March, I'll second that.
I would make that in the form of a motion.
Okay. So motion's been made by Mr. Carpenter, seconded by Mr. Berthium. I'll just ask if you'll also add that I guess this doesn't have to be part of the motion, to the town manager, can we include regular posts on Facebook, I don't know, weekly or something until this, just with a reminder with the email, leaving it open for residents so that they'll see that. And yeah, that doesn't have to be part of the motion, but.
No,
I will add that to my motion.
If I may ask under this motion, just if the board might want to consider the ambulance situation prior to March 14th. I don't necessarily think we should be waiting, 7 weeks to make a decision on that. That's more of a pressing need that the fire department has now. So if I can get this information to you, your next meeting, I believe, is in 3 weeks. So maybe that first meeting in February, we could discuss at least the need for some temporary ambulance impact shifts. Because I'm just concerned about waiting until March and the impact that it's having on the fire department.
Sure. This motion is just to continue the hearing, right? So it's not committing us to not spending the funds if something came up.
Okay.
So, good. Right. So we should be able to still talk about that at the meeting.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
So a motion's been made and seconded. I'll do by a roll call vote. Mrs. Ruffley?
Yes.
Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So we'll continue the hearing until our first meeting.
And we'll
in
let
March.
people know that. And we'll let people know, as I believe Mr. Carpenter said it, we do still have an email address out there dedicated. It's AuburnARPA at town.auburn.ma.us. And you can see it on our website, on the ARPA webpage, which we updated on Friday with the final rule and some other information. So it's all out there.
Great.
Through the chair, ask a quick question. Ms. Jacobson, were you looking for a vote on the ambulance funds this evening, given that the need is now and where numbers are with COVID, or?
I just wanted, through the chair, I just wanted to bring the dollar amount to you. I know we raised it on January 11th, that we were going to look into it, see how much the cost was, see if it was eligible. So I don't want the board to feel that they need to make a vote on it tonight. If you did, that would be wonderful. We could start putting everything into place. If the board wants to wait, I would respectfully ask that you do it at your very next meeting, because I do think there is a pressing need for this. This is a public safety issue and a public health issue.
It's right now. I mean, I'd be willing to vote on this tonight. I don't know how other board members feel.
For myself, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to ask some follow-up questions. I don't doubt the need. I just would like some time to think about this and ask some follow-up questions offline.
Through the chair, I think something that the board, if you wanted, could vote on tonight would be a smaller ask, and that would be the $25,000 for the study. We have to have an operational study because we can put into place some temporary measures like a impact shifts and a third ambulance, but we need a long-term plan. We need to know exactly what are the needs in the fire department, what are the needs based on COVID versus what are the needs based on what call volume is going to continue in the future, and then what kind of staffing do we need to support that. So that would be something I would think if we could get a vote on that tonight. We've talked about this several times now. If we could get a vote on a study for 25,000, we could at least get that underway. I think that would, we need to have the results of that study before we make any long-term plans. The ambulance is something that I would like to see the board vote on it in early February, but again, if we could do the 25,000 to get that study underway, we could get that going right now.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we authorize up to $25,000 for the study as outlined by the manager for the fire department staffing.
Second.
A motion's been made and seconded. I do want to ask if
There is just not enough activity in here.
if we're able to take the motion without it being on the agenda previously, members really just saw I just saw the letter tonight, and members haven't gotten it yet. I know we've talked about it before, but all that's on our agenda is continuing the public hearing on ARPA funds. So are we actually able to make a motion on this tonight?
I mean, that's a good question. I believe you can because it's still falling under the public hearing and it's still falling under ARPA. So right now you do have on your agenda, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Let me just pull it up for a minute. You do have on your agenda the continued public hearing on it to hear the input on the use of the town's ARPA. And then under town manager items, there is the report on the ARPA funds. So I think you're covered as far as public notice on it. It didn't notice that there was a vote. That is the only difference.
Right, yeah, I'm concerned with that. And it's a vote to spend some of the ARPA funds.
It is. It's a vote to spend. If you want to wait for the next meeting, we could do that. I think you're probably covered. Ed, what's your thought on that for a vote?
I agree with you, Julie. I think it could be voted. I think actually any of these items that are being reported on tonight do come with some cost value in consideration by the board to consider. So I don't see it being a problem. So I would feel comfortable if the board took action on this matter tonight.
Thank you. So I'll just say that I personally prefer to hold off on it, on everything that was brought up tonight before we spend money. I certainly bring it up at the next meeting when members have the letters in their packets. But, I just saw it coming into the room. So I'd rather not take any action on it, but there was a motion and it was seconded. Is there any other discussion on the motion before we vote?
Mr. Chairman, if you'd rather wait, I can withdraw my motion. I think if we can, the worst thing that can happen to us is we're going to have to revote it. I mean, we're in public session when we're not doing anything in secret with the lights off. Well, maybe you and Julie are, because the lights keep going off on them. But the rest of us are well lit, shall we say?
Well, your camera's not on, so
what can happen to us is we're going to have to revote it. But if you really are strong about it, I will withdraw my motion.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. Like I said, your camera's not on, so we don't know what you're doing either, Dan. But appreciate you withdrawing.
Everybody knows I never was a Boy Scout, but I'm usually considered a Boy Scout. So that I'm not doing anything dishonest.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion before we move on the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I think we've heard a number of times from a number of people that it's not a problem for us to vote on that and get that study started. I know they've been struggling over there, and I just don't. Where our next meeting is 3 weeks from now, I just soon get anything going that we can get going. So I would like to put that motion back on and hear all 5 board members' thoughts.
Okay.
I'll second. Yeah, their vote.
All right, the motion has been made and seconded. Is there any other discussion before I do a roll call vote? All right, seeing done, Mr. Ruffley,
Yes.
Mr. Berthium,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Wren,
Yes.
and the chair votes no. The motion passes 4-1.
Great, thank you.
All right. Moving on, under communications, we have, members have in your packets a letter from the Mass Local Election District Review Commission. There's no action required from us tonight. This is just to let us know that the map that we were shown 3 meetings ago now
Right.
was accepted. So again, no need to take any action on it. I don't know if board members have any comments or questions related to it. All right, seeing none. Under select board general items, we have the subcommittee recommendation on town manager evaluation forms. The evaluation form is in your packets. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Berthium and Mr. Carpenter, who are on the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We met, again, had our final meeting just before this meeting to finalize the new town manager evaluation. What we're recommending that the board vote to accept. What we tried to do was to get the evaluation down so that, number one, the town manager didn't have to spend 40 hours to 80 hours or more trying to fill us in on everything that was done. I would hate like heck to have to try to summarize once a year everything that I do for my company throughout the year. So what we did was we tried to simplify the evaluation, and I think we came up with a real good breakdown. It shows 4 different categories: relationship with the select board, the town administration, the budgeting and finance, and the community relations. And in each of those 4 categories, there's basically 3 talking points. And in those 3 talking points, our thought was that if we just take those categories, the town manager can give us a very brief, give us brief examples for 3 talking points for each category. And then we as individual board members, if we want to get more information, the town manager has always made herself available while we're in the review process, while we're in the evaluation process, to sit down with her or call her and get more information. So I believe that hopefully we've cut her workload at least in half. We've cut our workload at least in half, and I think we're arriving at a lot of the same results. And I think that I completely appreciate and was amazed at the detail that she has gone into in past years, and I'm sure that she'll also be very thorough with giving answers and examples to the 12 talking points that we have here. But I look forward to it being more summarized and letting us reach out and ask the questions if we have them. So I'm happy to hear from first Mr. Carpenter to see if he has any other comments, and then other board members to see if they have any comments or suggestions. But I'm very happy with the new proposed town manager evaluation.
Mr. Carpenter, do you have anything to add? Oh, there you go.
I do not. Other than to say it was enjoyable to work with Lionel and the manager. on this process, and I agree that it's hopefully easier for the manager and it's more meaningful for us as well.
Do other board members have any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to the town manager.
I just want to thank, I want to thank both Mr. Berthium and Mr. Carpenter, the subcommittee members, for looking at this. I think, I agree, it was great because they asked for my input as well, so this is something that we all agree is a better mechanism for reporting information, and I always assure you, I'll give you whatever information, and if it's not included, please ask me for it. I'd rather be asked for it than have it look like I withheld something that you couldn't score me on. So when I turn in the report, and I think it's due the third week in February, so when I turn in that report, if it is missing something, I'd appreciate it if you could let me know, and I'll give you that will give me the opportunity to get more information to you, and I'll try to be concise with it, because I agree, it's very time consuming to write a 40-page report with everything going on right now. We do have a lot, so I appreciate it, and I'm sure none of you need to read a 40-page report because you'd much rather read a 400-page final rule, I'm sure. So I think this is better for all of us.
I was going to say the downside is now we don't get to read the long report and actually know in detail what you've done the last year.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it will be in the annual report. That's still out there.
Scott, I did see that you unmuted yourself before I turned it over. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on the subcommittee and great work. It looks great, so thank you.
I'll just add that also. Thank you to Lionel and Dan for all the work that you put into this. Hopefully the process definitely improved for everyone around, so thank you both. And with that, is there actually
one more? I'm sorry, you needed to vote on that, right?
Yeah, we do. So I actually don't know if we need the vote on this or if the vote needs to be on to approve the amendment to the town manager. So I guess it would be 5B that we actually need
Correct.
to vote on.
I think by voting on 5B, you're accepting this form to be inserted into the employment contract.
All right. So on agenda item 5B, is there a motion to?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve an amendment to the town manager's employment contract, section 5, town manager evaluation, part C, to replace performance evaluation form under exhibit A of the contract, approved by the Board of Selectmen on April 8th, 2013, with the form approved by the Board of Selectmen as part of this motion.
I'll second that.
All right. Motion's been made and seconded by roll call vote. Mrs. Ruffley?
Yes.
Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dan, for that.
Thank you.
All right. Under gift acceptances, we have none. Proclamations and recognitions, we have none. Under town manager items, we have the report on public comment received in ARPA funds. I know we just talked about that. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
I'm all set. Thank you.
On a 6B, we have a vote to accept and expend $150,000 from the Mass Department of Environmental Protection for sewer improvements.
Through the chair. So part of the ARPA / FY22 state surplus budget bill that passed it was either the end of December or January. I think it was the last day in December. That bill included some earmarks for use of either ARPA or FY22 surplus funding. My understanding is that these funds, we worked with Senator Moore's office, and they left the language in the line item generic, which is good for us, to provide $150,000 to us. It will actually come from the Mass Department of Environmental Protection for sewer improvements. So this $150,000 that we have that we can use towards sewer improvements, no other parameters on it, other than our recommendation would be, let's see what we're going to do with the ARPA dollars on sewer and see if there's any smaller projects that the 150 could cover. And it is my understanding that we do have a couple of years to spend there. So I'm just asking today for the board to vote to accept and expend. And then we'll look at this in the context of all the sewer projects that we have and see where we can put the dollars in the best place. And if there's an immediate need, this is available to us now.
Okay. Do board members have any questions or comments?
I will make that motion to accept and expend $150,000 from the Mass Department of Environmental Protection for sewer improvements.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded by roll call vote. Mrs. Ruffley?
Yes.
Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes.
Thank you. And just want to, again, just thank Senator Moore's office and Senator Moore for his support and for getting this earmark for us.
Under table items, we have nothing. And select board member items, under 8A, we have the continued discussion and potential vote on Mass General Law, Chapter 53, Section 18, by myself. So this has been on the agenda for, I think, the last 3 meetings also. I'm glad that we finally have a full board, which is what I've been waiting for, to actually ask everyone for a vote for it. Members have had a lot of time to review it, so I will be asking for a vote tonight. This, again, would allow for the mailings to be sent out to registered voters in town. I'll turn it over to board members if they have any questions or comments on this. Yeah, that's all I have.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that I am sympathetic to it, but I feel that without some serious work with the legislature to do something not necessarily the same as Shrewsbury, but something in the manner of doing things electronically, I just feel that it could potentially become a sticky wicket for individuals trying to implement it.
I don't understand. Could you expand on that, Tim?
Well, as it was explained previously, when this was first under proposal a couple of years ago, essentially, anytime this comes before or there's a question, if we can't, not us, but if the town or the groups, whether it be pro or against, aren't willing to write a summary, it would fall to the town to come up with a summary. And I just don't see that as being something that we want to engage in. It puts council in a difficult place if council were to be the designated person to do it, which I don't know that that's necessarily who needs to do it, but it might be. And just the sheer cost of doing it seems to be cost prohibitive. How would you plan for it? How would you budget for it? You know, I think Mr. Liberty is correct in that, you know, this isn't going to happen every year, but it's going to happen. And how do we budget for that? You know, where do we find this money to put funds into that line item in order to effectuate this, I guess?
Fair point. I conversely think that it can be done, although I understand, believe me, I understand your points there. But I think that the value of informing the public outweighs the cost and those concerns. And I just think, I think council, I get they have to walk a fine line, and I get that the way that when there's outside groups writing these things, they're clearly swaying. But that's kind of what the problem, you know what I mean? That's kind of why I'm a yes vote for this whole matter, is that people weren't properly informed. So I do think council, and in any council wisdom, that they could figure a factual way to put what a yes vote, what a no vote means. So I understand your points. I feel the other way, though.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Brother?
So I lean more toward Mr. Carpenter's view in that, it can create some controversy, but also it can get to be expensive budget-wise. I kind of feel like if we did have to have it go, if we did vote on this and it went out to town council, I kind of would almost be okay with that, but I'm not in favor of expending money to send paper mailing or card or anything else out to the voters. If we wanted to take what council wrote up and had it at a table, we only have one voting location, and anybody that makes their effort to go down and vote wants to go down and read the town council's interpretation of it before they walk in and vote. If we could do something like that, then I would lean more toward being in favor of it. But I'm not really in favor of us doing something up and spending money to go out, to, I don't know, 10,000 voters when we literally get like 600 people to show up at the polls. I'd like to get more, and I'd like to think that, a better explanation would get us more, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's important, like a few years ago when we had the dispensary miscommunication, I feel, with that particular election. It would have been nice maybe to have a better interpretation of it. But I don't think that we should be spending money doing mailings or anything else. If we can, put a small budget to have the council write something up that can be available for people to read either through media or there at the voting station or voting facility, I would tend to kind of go along with it. But if it's a blanket thing to just send out to everyone, I don't think I'm in favor of it right now.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Ripley?
I agree with Mr. Berthium that a information packet right at the entryway to voting would be great, but I also think the mailing is a really good idea too. And what's better to remind people that there's an election going on and there's these questions that they should pay attention to. So I would be for it at this time.
Is there anything else from any of the board members? Seeing none, I just want to say, I think, putting something out at the table would be great, would be informative. It might help anyone who thinks to ask before they go up, but a lot of people, when they go in, go up to actually take out their ballot, don't realize what the question is until they're actually looking at it, and by then they wouldn't be able to return and find out what the question was. And even if they did, you're still only looking at the 600 people at the polls. You're not getting the full mailing list that I think is important. I mean, and this is when we're considering a ballot question, this is something that if we're looking at a 2.5 override, something that's very important for the town that I think is important to let the voters know. Mr. Carpenter had mentioned something about electronic. I think a few years ago we had talked about, if there was a way to send this out electronically to lower costs, that would be great. So I think that's what you were getting at there. I agree, but unfortunately that's not how the laws are written right now. So that's something that we can look at later as to including, voluntary email list. But I think this is, one of the best options that we have right now. So with that, I don't know if there's a motion.
Mr. Chair, before we have a motion, while we're still in discussion, I'd just like to kind of talk to Mrs. Ruffley's point, which is a very good point that, it's a reminder to everyone that, hey, there's an election here. This is a point of possible contention with the election, and we need, you should get down there and speak your piece. Well, wouldn't that be every election? Shouldn't we if you're going to do that, I feel that every election in town is an important election, and that people should be versed on who's running and what the questions are year. And so to that point, then do we just have to expend that money with everything? Because what makes one question more important than another? And who determines that, okay, this is the one that we should spend money on, this is the one that we can just let go and, you know, maybe have less voters? Or, you know, that's where I think Mr. Carpenter is right, where you kind of hit that slippery slope, you know. Every election is important, and I think people, you hate to say it, but have that civic duty to you know, to go down and vote and pay attention to what's going on in town. It's not our problem if they don't. I mean, it's our consequence sometimes, but you know, it's what determines what's an important question and what's not an important question.
I mean, if I could just clarify my position, I'm not opposed to anybody getting more information about anything. I think, you know, the ARPA hearing was one of the main reasons why I thought we as a board should at least float the idea that we have a meeting. But there is a way to make this less costly and more to the point where we can get information out there. You know, the last few elections, I've received 0 mail from any candidate to the House. And I always do a mailing every time I run. So I'm the first one to want people to get out at the polls. And I want everybody to be informed. But I also think that as we look at how we can do that in a way that's economical, as well as getting that out there, that's, you know, the job of the legislature is to update these laws. You know, when was this provision even enacted? You know, we can talk to Representative Frost. We can talk to Senator Moore. We can try and affect change in the legislation, similar to what happened with the sewer departments, as Lionel and Tristan would know from being on the board. They used to have to do a rather cumbersome process, so they went to the legislature and they got a change. I think this is a section of the law that we could affect change on and make more economical for the towns. Because think of some of the smaller towns out west who have very little staff, part-time hours, and this is a very cumbersome bill and something that, you know, a town of 300 or 1,000 people can't do. So we could, as a community, help our neighbors in smaller communities as well as communities of any size. So that's, you know, the path that I, you know, would like to see us take. But, you know, obviously it's a board vote. It's, you know, I'm not going to lose any sleep either way. So I appreciate everybody's points. I'm just, you know, I'm not anti-information. I think I've probably been in almost 9 years the one who's wanted more input from the public than we've gotten. So anyways, I digress. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Scott, I saw you unmute. I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to say before. No.
It sounded important at the time, but no.
Okay. So I just wanted to add that, you know, I agree. I wish we could send it to every election. I wish that was how it was written. Question or elections where we don't have a ballot question. I'd be willing to spend the extra money to say, here are the names of the candidates that are running for these positions as well. But, you know, the way the law is written, it's just for a ballot question. I'll take what I can get. And I'd also agree to, you know, write to the state delegation, ask them that they may want to consider adopting it. And I'd even recommend making that as part of the motion, as, you know, we adopt this chapter and with a letter to go to Representative Frost, Senator Moore, asking them to take a look at this, if at all possible, and see if this chapter can be updated, either to send it to make it so that towns can send out mailings every year, or say that towns can accept emails and send things out electronically, or maybe in some other way to update it. So I would absolutely be in favor of that, but I think adopting this now says that we're committed to actually informing the residents when a ballot question comes before them. And so I'm obviously going to support it. That's why I brought it back. But that's all I have. And if there's no other discussion on it, I'll take a motion.
Kristen, do you mind giving me the form of the motion?
Motion would be needed to adopt Chapter 53, Section 18B, and if you also wanted to add, and to send a letter from the board signed by the chair to Representative Frost and Senator Moore, requesting that they take a look at Mass General Law, Chapter 53, Section 18B, for potential revisions or updates.
Excellent. Thank you. So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
By a roll call vote, Mrs. Ruffley?
Yes.
Mr. Berthium?
Out of my total respect for the board members, I'll vote yes on that.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. It's unanimous. Thank you all. I do appreciate your support. I know you've had your reservations for Ms. Berthium, and I know you talked about them a few years ago. So I really do appreciate you, out of respect, voting yes and making it a unanimous vote. That doesn't go without recognition. So thank you. And Mr. Carpenter, thank you for raising, your concerns as well. And hopefully we can see some change to make it a little bit better of a law. With that, there are the minutes from November 22nd, 2021. Are there any corrections or omissions? Seeing none, I'll accept them as read and thank Mr. Wren for opening the meeting when I was late that night. And is there anything else from any other board member or town administration?
I'm all set, thank you.
Seeing none, is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call vote, Mrs. Ruffley?
Yes.
Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, we are adjourned. Have a good night.